Okay. I've been reading a book lately called The Power of Prayer by Peter Wagner. It's a really cool book I've been reading. It's really inspired me and made me hungry for God and to push in for a bigger God, because I've been listening to a lot of tapes and teachings lately on God and the supernatural and all that kind of stuff. It just makes me so hungry because I just want to see this stuff and live in it. And
There's an old song that says, "Put your sweet lips a little closer to the phone." So put the microphone up.
okay.
Okay.
So basically what I'm going to do, can you guys hear me? All right? All right. I got a little PowerPoint made up. It's just real quick. There it is, Kiambu, Kenya. I couldn't find a picture of a map, so I got a picture of a giraffe from Kiambu, Kenya. And basically, I've been reading through this guy's book here, Peter Wagner, and he's got a friend named Thomas Muthi, and he dedicated a whole chapter to Thomas Muthi in this book, and he talks about Kiambu, Kenya. You guys must remember Kiambu, Kenya through the prayer cave, or through transformation videos on the prayer cave. You guys remember watching the transformation video? Well, that's what this story is, anyways. So basically, what happened was this. Okay. Peter Wagner's friend Thomas Muthi is a mega church pastor. He has a pastor that church seats 4,000 people. And they live in revival every day in Kiambu, Kenya. And Kiambu, Kenya was a city that was dedicated to evil and darkness. It was such a bad city that everybody was just like, drinking out in the streets, fighting all the time, all kinds of wild parties going on. And it was such a bad city and had a national reputation for like evil and violence. And it was so bad, the government officials, when they were getting assigned to the city, they would pay bribes to their superiors so that they wouldn't have to be, assigned to this city. That's how bad it was. Anyways, and it was well known in Kenya, Kiambu, Kenya. It was well known in the Kenya area. And Pastor Thomas Muthi was an evangelist. He traveled the world evangelizing different nations, and he loved what he did. And he praised God every day. He said, "I'm an evangelist. I'm traveling to the nations." And he said, "This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life." And things changed. One day, while he was in prayer, he just was praying to God, and God said, "Thomas, I want you to go to Kiambu, Kenya, and plant a church right in the middle of like the den of iniquity." And he thought, "Oh, great, lovely, just what I always wanted to do. I'm an evangelist. I travel the world. That's what I want to do. I don't want to go to Kiambu, Kenya." Anyways, so he tested the word of God with his wife. They sat down, read the word, and they both felt that it was God's will for him to plant a church in this city. So what they felt they should do before they move into the city is to get into prayer. And what they did is they spent 6 months in prayer and fasting. And for the 6 months, they just fasted like 2 meals a day. Every once in a while, they'd do a juice fast, a Daniel fast. Because Thomas Muthi believes if you're going to move into a city that's this overcome by witchcraft and like evil, you got to win the battle in the heavenlies first before you can move the ground troops in. So through the 6 months of prayer and fasting, he asked God for detailed words of knowledge, and it wasn't rare for him to hear God's voice or anything, because it was quite common for Thomas Muthi. And just so you know, this guy isn't flaky. He's a well-known, respected leader in the church, so you guys can trust what he's doing here is from God. And anyways, so he sat down in prayer with his wife one day, and they asked God for some detailed words of knowledge on what the names of the principalities over these areas were. And God gave him the name witchcraft is the ruling principality over these areas. So they started praying into it and asking God to give them favor with the city. And where this city had a reputation as a pastor's graveyard, he thought, "Oh, great, I get to move into the pastor's graveyard." Churches tried to come into this city and set up before, and they left like bankrupt. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't seem to break through. There was Pentecostal charismatic churches. They'd go in, and then the pastors would leave because of the witchcraft in the city. This witch, Mama Jane, what she would do, she would send she had witches working for her, and she would send them into the church ground wherever these churches were planted, and they put curses and hexes and stuff on the grounds around the churches, and there would be such a power of witchcraft coming against the church. People were getting sick all the time. They just couldn't, they just couldn't break through. So they'd end up leaving town, go bankrupt. So anyways, Thomas Muthi prayed for 6 months with his wife, and God said, "Okay, it's time to move into the city." And as soon as they moved into the city, they went and talked to the mayor, and they had favor with the mayor right away, which was very rare because all the other churches that went in there never had favor with the mayor. And the mayor said you could use the municipal hall if you want to preach the gospel. And that was just a miracle because no other preacher was allowed to use the municipal hall right in the middle of Kiambu, Kenya to preach the gospel. So he started every day. He got some tires and a big, huge platform, and he'd stand on that thing. He was a real short guy. And he preached the gospel in the streets every day. And he started winning souls. And that's how he did it. He just started preaching in the streets, and he was like, praise God. And they used the municipal hall for 1 year. And he wasn't satisfied, though, with the church growth. He was like, God, there's got to be more. And he felt that God was calling him to strategic prayer, some radical prayer. So they started praying once a week, all the intercessors. There's only 5 intercessors now on his team. And they get together once a week, and they start praying for breakthrough. And they start coming against the powers of witchcraft in the area, because all the principalities and stuff are at work in that area, big time. And as they were praying, people were getting sick. They noticed some of their intercessors were starting to get sick. They were getting all kinds of attacks. And he said, God, we need a more radical strategy. What should we do? And he said, I want 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, prayer and intercession in your church. And he said, we can't do that in the municipal hall, God. So God said, okay, I'm going to move you guys to the basement of a store on the main street of Kiambu, Kenya. And you guys are going to rent that store, and you guys are going to use the basement. So they moved down to the basement down there, and they called it the prayer cave because when people would walk down into the basement there, they kind of felt like a creepy cave, so they called it the prayer cave, and it's still to this day known as the Kiambu Prayer Cave. And so they started this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week prayer. And what they did is they'd have 5 intercessors that would stay in the church and fast and pray for 24 hours. But what would they do? Is they'd schedule one person to go in and pray, and that one intercessor would go into the church and sit there and pray for 24 hours and fast. And then when his shift was done, another person would come in, another intercessor, and then he'd take his shift and start praying and fasting for 24 hours. And that's what they did. And they noticed that the attacks on all these intercessors were fierce. They were all getting sick. They were getting like just beat up big time. And they were so overcome with sickness that their prayers just weren't effective. So he said, God, what do we got to do? So he started praying and asking God. He said, God, show us some real strategy here so we can have a big effect on the city. We want to have an effect on the city. You put us in the city. Oh, right on. Free water. Look at that.
Don't pray that it turns into one.
Phil. All right. So where was I?
Prayer cave.
Oh, yeah, the prayer cave strategy. So he said, God, show us some real strategy so we can have a big effect on Kiambu, Kenya. We want to win Kiambu, Kenya for Jesus. So what God showed him, God took him to a story in the book of Joshua and showed him some real strategy. And God told him, he said, each intercessor needs 2 armor bearers. So what they did is the person that was scheduled to fast and pray for the 24 hours and the person that was scheduled the previous day and the day after were his armor bearers. And they both cover him in prayer. So they did that as a strategy. And that now each day that they'd have somebody in there praying, they had the 2 armor bearers. They had the 2 armor bearers covering each person that was interceding and fasting for the 24 hours. And you know what? All the attacks stopped. No more sickness against the intercessors. And they're like, wow, we got a strategy and it worked. And to this very day, they still got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week prayer and intercession. But the prayer teams developed up to 400 highly dedicated prayer warriors that are praying to this very day. And they split up in blocks of 15 to 20. And each one of those 15 to 20 have 2 prayer warriors covering the person interceding. And as they started the strategy, they noticed in the city that the powers of witchcraft started to break. Mama Jane had all these witches working for her, and they were getting saved. So they were losing power. And the police force noticed that she was well known. She was a notorious witch. And she disguised her clinic as a manual clinic. She disguised herself as a Christian. Anyways, so the police, and they were all noticing that the powers of witchcraft were dropping in the city. And they kept praying and praying and praying. And there's so much breakthrough. People were getting saved. And like I said, they're up to 4,000 people now. Seating 4,000 people in their church every Sunday. And they're in revival. Open heavens. The Spirit of God's pouring down. All the bar rooms in the city are turned to churches now. It's no longer the murder capital of Kenya. Okay, that's the power of prayer. There's no murders. I mean, it's dedicated to Jesus. It's an entire city that's dedicated to Jesus. And that's the power of prayer. When I read that, I said, wow. I want to see that.
What happened to Mama Jane?
She got arrested, and she had a big, huge python snake in her manual clinic. And when the police came in and seen that, they shot it. And when they shot it, the principality broke over the area. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.